Hi there, this is Maniyam. I'm a founder and CEO of Elephant Scale. What I want to talk about is how to build a successful big data team. A quick intro, I have been a big data practitioner for the past few years. I also teach a lot of big data courses. I founded Elephant Scale along with my friend Mark, and we specialize in teaching big data and data science courses. I also wrote a couple of books. The first one is Hadoop Illuminated. It's an open source book, so you can do a search and download it. And also, we just published a course with O'Reilly on Hadoop and Spark. Also, when I can, I contribute to open source, and my contact details is right here. My intended audience for this talk is hiring managers or execs, people who are building teams. So I'm going to share with you some of the things I have seen on both sides of the aisle. I have been consulting in big data, so I went to interviews and I was hired. I also interviewed and hired other big data developers. And also for our clients, we help them build teams by interviewing key people into their team. And during the course of our training, which we taught like thousands of students, I get to interact with them and see how their teams are built up, how are they training their workforce to adopt big data. Okay, so let's start with some background. Is this big data shortage real? You can Google around and find lots of studies that suggest, yes, there's a real talent shortage in big data. And also, as we are going forward, more and more devices are going to be connected and they are going to produce more data. So we are going to be living in a world increasingly data driven. So big data, whether you like it or not, is something you're going to have to deal with sooner or later. So I plugged in some of these job titles at indeed.com. It's a job site. And one of the cool things they do is they give you trends. So you can sort of see big data and data science really trending up, while the traditional SQL data analyst roles are kind of trending down. So this is a kind of a nice way to see how the demand is going up for the modern big data and data science technologies. So first question a lot of people ask is, do we really need to build a big data team in-house? And that's a valid question. What I recommend and what I have seen is, if data is core of your business, then it makes sense to build your own team. If data is not a key part of your business, maybe you can consider outsourcing and have somebody else manage the data for you. So both options have pros and cons. When you build your own team, right, you can hire the right talent. Once you have a good team in place, you can really build and deploy products that suit your needs. However, building your own team also will take a while because you have to hire new people or train existing teams into big data. The downside of outsourcing is basically, you become vendor dependent, and also potential all the other vendor issues, right? Maybe your expectations are not met. Maybe things are not done the way you want. Those are the potential downsides of outsourcing your data. So when we talk about big data talent, what's involved? What are the roles? I sort of put them in three buckets. One is big data developers. These are people who actually build applications and build your data infrastructure. I would look for people with very good developer background and, most importantly, good Linux working experience. And also, they have to have experience in popular big data systems like Hadoop, Spark, and NoSQL. The other bucket is what I call DevOps or admins. These guys, they keep things running. So imagine you are a Linux admin or a network admin, how we used to keep things running like databases and our network. Similarly, we need people who will be running our big data systems. What I look for is a good scripting sort of admin background and also familiar with modern technologies like Puppet and Chef and Docker. So these are what we call admins. The final bucket is analyst or data scientist. These are the guys who analyze the data. I look for good analytics background. They know modern languages like R and Python. And I also look for good statistics and math background. Familiarity with big data tools is a plus. Also, most importantly, if they know your domain, right? This is important. Imagine you are a bank and you really want to hire analysts who know how the banking industry works. So domain knowledge is very, very critical. And as you know, this title, data scientists, is a pretty hot job description right now. And the really good ones are in very good demand. I think one of the magazines, maybe Forbes, mentioned data scientist is the sexiest job. These guys are in very high demand. Let's talk about some hiring process. So why is it hard to hire big data talent? First of all, the technology is fairly young. It's just less than 10 years old. So people who have good experience in these modern technologies is a pretty small pool. And when you talk about big data, it is a complex technology. It has lots of moving parts. If you take Hadoop or Spark or NoSQL, all of these are reasonably complex technologies with lots of moving parts. Also, to be an effective big data developer, you need lots of other skills as well. For example, you need to have a good developer background, comfortable in Linux, some scripting skills. Things like that are very handy when it comes to big data. And also, getting experience at large scale is not easy, right? I mean, you had to work at companies that have huge amounts of data to get practical experience in dealing with large systems. And that's not really easy to get unless you work at one of these large companies. And of course, big data talent is expensive to hire. So I'm going to start with some of the mistakes I've seen. When I see job descriptions, for example, somebody says, I'm looking for somebody who has 10 years of Hadoop and 5 years of Spark, things like that. These people, they do exist, but they are working at companies like Yahoo and Facebook. And most likely they are probably not looking for another job. Also, very narrow job definitions shrink your talent pool and you have less choices. And of course, money matters. If you're not market rate competitive, you're not going to get good people. And also, interview process. I'll talk about this a little bit later. What I like to do, this is like a very high level tips. If there's like one takeaway from this presentation, it might be this slide. And I'll talk about each of these points in the coming slides, but this is kind of the summary. I personally like to hire a strong generalist because in big data, technologies change all the time. So you don't want to go and hire somebody who's just specialized in one or two technologies. You want somebody who's proficient in modern technologies and also can pick up new technologies very quickly. And I always emphasize, if you're building a team especially, the first one or two hires are very important because they are going to be your team leaders and they are going to help you build your team. So really spend your time and don't compromise when doing the first hires. We will talk about amplification in a second. Also, a lot of people when interview for big data talent, they don't interview properly. And I always recommend, especially the first few hires, you really have to interview them thoroughly. Another option, of course, is you can train your existing team in big data technologies than hiring somebody from outside. So I always make a point about active and passive. Active candidates are applying for your jobs. Passive candidates are not applying for a job. So the way to get passive candidates is you got to go through some referrals or you got to go through their network. In the past, I've hired some really great passive candidates, but it takes a while to really get to them and convince them that they have to come and work for you. However, they do make really great hires, right? Because especially in the leadership roles, I love to hire people who are passive. The advantage of hiring active candidates, meaning people who are in the job market right now, is it's a shorter hiring window, right? You can pretty quickly move and hire them because they are looking to change jobs. So here's why I would prefer hiring a generalist as opposed to a specialist. There are times you want to hire a specialist. For example, we hear this job request all the time. For example, you might be looking for an expert to come and fine-tune your system, and that's fine. However, for these kind of special requests, I recommend going to a consulting arrangement. There are consulting companies that specialize in different technologies. So bring them on board for a few days or a few weeks to fine-tune your system. But hiring, I would recommend hiring somebody who is strong generalist. The reason is they can adapt to new technologies and also your hiring pool is much larger. So where do we source the candidates from? I cannot like the slide because I put up the old resume versus the new resume. When I interview people, I ask them to give me their LinkedIn and their GitHub profile. So when I look at people who are very active in, say, GitHub in open source projects, to me, they are very attractive hires. And also looking at Stack Overflow, I look at who's responding to questions, who's being active. That could be a great source as well. Just because we are hiring big data doesn't mean we are throw away the method that we have been working. Referrals are still pretty big. You can ask your employees or you can ask your network to recommend people. Recruiters are still pretty good. You have to kind of measure how effective they are, meaning if they send you 10 candidates, out of the 10 candidates, how many are advancing to the next stage? Yeah, very important, right? Otherwise, you'll be wasting a lot of your time screening candidates that may not be a right fit. So for big data, I have seen some of the recruiters, they monitor mailing lists or they monitor LinkedIn or GitHub activity and will contact. And I have certainly gotten requests from people monitoring my LinkedIn or GitHub activity. Hiring on conferences is a big deal. Most conferences have some sort of a job board. Posting on the job board will give you pretty good exposure. And another modern hiring tool is hosting meetups and hackathons. A lot more companies are doing these now to attract an audience. And also it's a great place to pitch the audience of what you're doing and kind of tell them some of the interesting stuff you're working on. So another way to hire people who are very active in open source is you need to be a little creative. The really open source stars they're in very high demand and they're not cheap. So usually you had to approach them through a mutual contact. And one of the tricks I have seen that works is giving them a promotion. They may be a software engineer at, say, Netflix or Facebook. You may give them a good promotion to hire them away from these big companies. So give them a step up so they are enticed. And also, even though money is important, there are a few other what I call soft benefits that actually interest them. So things like allowing them to work on open source. A lot of companies allow employees to work on open source maybe once a week in company time, meaning they get to work on open source while getting paid by the company, which is a very attractive perk for a lot of these open source committers. Send them to conferences, let them speak. So they could be very good kind of a promotion for your company as well. And with really tough commutes these days, a lot of people prefer if they can work from home. So offer these soft benefits in addition to money to entice them away from other big companies. I always talk about first hire. When I say first hire, let's say you're building a new team and let's say this person is a team lead or architect and he's going to be instrumental in building your team. So you really want to spend your time hiring this person. You do not want to take any shortcuts. You don't want to compromise too much. I always emphasize hands-on knowledge, especially in big data and data science. Being hands-on is pretty much required. I have interviewed my share of what I call PowerPoint architects, meaning they don't know anything about writing code or designing systems, but they can do really great PowerPoints. We usually, we don't want those. Also, leadership quality is very important. He has to be able to lead your team and mentor the team. So leadership qualities are very important. And if you need help interviewing a person for a key role, I recommend getting outside help. You can contact us if you want. We have actually helped a few of our clients to hire big data talent. So we'll be happy to help you as well. Amplification. And I put this picture up because it illustrates the point more than what I could say. So one of the approach amplification works is you hire a couple of top developers to your team and then maybe hire junior or mid-level developers. So the leads will actually nurture and mentor the team, because otherwise, if you really want to hire all experienced developers, it may be not even possible, right? Because these people are in very high demand. Especially when you hire, maybe out of school or junior developers, they are affordable and they tend to be very generalists, and you can mentor them and teach them and train them in new technologies. So amplification, always think about this. All right, let's talk about interview process. This is one of my pet peeves of mine. Whenever we interview people, we don't usually spend enough time really preparing for the interview. Most of the interviews, unfortunately, are kind of done very ad hoc. For example, somebody would come and say, hey, I have this person sitting in the conference room. Can I interview this person? So I might get 2 minutes to look over their resume and go interview. I don't recommend that at all. So here are some of the tips I have seen that really worked out for us when we were hiring people. We definitely have what we call pre-interview meeting. And we review the resume as a team, and here people might highlight some of the strong points. And also what I recommend is divide up questioning areas. For some people might say, you will ask him about X. The other person might go and ask about Y. So this way you maximize your coverage and you're not asking the same questions over and over again. I'm sure we all been to interviews, everyone comes in and they kind of ask pretty much the same question as the guy before. We don't want that to happen. Before you go and talk to interview somebody, don't talk to others, because that might influence your thinking. When I go to interview, I like to keep a clean slate, so I get to ask the question I want, and I'm not influenced by others' perception. And after the interview, we all get together and do what we call debrief meeting. And you want to do this right away, because when things are still fresh in your mind, right? If you do it after a couple of days or after a week, you may sometimes forget some of the points you want to mention. So have the debrief meeting immediately after the interview, once everyone is done interviewing the person. All right, so some of the interview format I recommend. Again, I highly recommend having a pre-interview meeting and agree on topics you want to cover. So this way you're not duplicating each other's questions. I always kind of start with ask them a kind of an icebreaker. I will ask them, tell me about a project you have done, which is a pretty standard question. The reason I like this is it kind of gets them a little at ease, because we all get nervous when you go on interviews. And also this way they can talk about something they have done, and this kind of puts them at ease. I also ask them about concepts, right? Kind of a theoretical question, just to make sure they have pretty firm understanding. I ask them if they are working on any open source project. And finally, I give them a problem and then ask them to basically design, or maybe quiz them on their design, and also have them write some code. It may not be perfect, but at least it'll show me who's hands-on. This is kind of my high-level format. So if I am interviewing an experienced candidate, I definitely look for a wide spectrum of knowledge. I mean, they may not have worked on every technology, but they should at least know sort of the highlights, the plus and minus, when they would use each technology, things like that. Because that's very important knowledge, especially in big data, when technologies come up very quickly. We want our big data leaders to know what technologies to adopt. Again, I am a big fan of hands-on. I mentioned this. I really love people with open source experience here, because that shows me they are really passionate about technology, and they are really kind of really into this. And when I'm interviewing junior candidates, again, we grill them on basically computer science fundamentals, your algorithms, writing code, data structures, things like that. Need to know the concepts pretty well. And I am very partial to people who are working on open source. And I've seen this time and time again. We get people who are tinkering with some open source project, could be some on their own, could be contributing to some other big project. Again, that to me, that shows me initiative. And also I look for the passion, meaning like how, kind of how hungry they are to learn, right? Especially when you're hiring somebody junior, you want them to be able to work and learn new technologies very quickly. So we talked about this. When I'm hiring DevOps, I look for basically a good admin background. So, and one of the things I look for is, how good are they in scripting things? And actually, I ask them to, if they have any project that they are working on, I ask them to give me a demo as well. So if they bring their laptop, some people have given me demos of some scripts they have written, for example. So one of these person actually came in and he had a script to spin up some machines on Amazon, a Hadoop cluster on Amazon, and he demonstrated to me that. And within 2 minutes, I could see his script is working, and that's a pretty good demo. Also, another thing I ask them is give them a troubleshooting question, right? I will say, this is what's happening to our Hadoop cluster or a Cassandra cluster. How will you go about debugging it? It gives me a chance to kind of see how familiar they are with technologies and how they will go about troubleshooting. Very, very important. Data scientists, right? So again, like I said, data science is very hot technology right now. So how do we hire a right data scientist? Again, a couple of things you want to keep in mind, whether do you want somebody who knows the domain? Like if you're an insurance company, if you're a healthcare company, you want somebody who knows the domain very well? Or do you want to hire like a generalist who can come in and learn the domain? Also, one of the mistakes I see being made all the time is people mix up data scientists versus data engineers. Remember, data engineers focus on building infrastructure. Data analysts or data scientists, they basically focus on analyzing data. They're not too concerned about the infrastructure. Infrastructure is usually done by engineers and DevOps. I always look for very solid data science background, like solid stats, math, need to know modern analytical language like R or Python or Spark. And also, very importantly, need to have good visualizing skills. I need to know some graphic package. Could be Excel, right? I mean, there's a lot of things you can do with Excel, but some graph technology with R or Python is important. Since data science is a pretty hot, pretty hot area right now, there are of course a lot of people faking to be data scientists. So you can have to basically have a rigorous interview process to weed these guys out. So here are some of the kind of wow moments I had in my interview process. One of the ones is this person was working on an open source project, and he actually gave me a demo of a working, I think this is like a sentiment analysis on using big data technologies. That was great. And another successful one is he actually wrote a working solution on his laptop and even kind of did like a little graphing to show me this solution is working. That was pretty cool. So basically, showing me hands-on expertise, I'm always impressed by those, right? And it also shows me they actually came prepared. Mistakes, right? We all been to interviews. We felt like we were being interviewed for a totally wrong position. One of my friend, he's a big data expert. He was going to an interview at a big company. He called me the day and he said, Suji, I walked out of the interview. I asked him why, what happened? And he said, when he went to interview, they were asking him very trivial, very sort of CS 101 kind of questions. And he really thought, man, they really don't understand what they were interviewing for. So he basically walked out. So the reason I mentioned the story is when you're interviewing people for a certain big data or data science position, you have to interview the right way, right? Another mistake I've seen is when you ask somebody, tell me about the project you have done, they could go for 30 minutes, an hour describing the project they have done. So I always set a time clock. I say, okay, you have 10 minutes to tell me about the project you have done. So this kind of put a hard stop, right? Because we really want to ask us a question we prepared. It's good to have them talk about their own project, but not for the whole duration of the interview. This is, I'm on the side of being hands-on, so I always ask people to either write scripts or design systems or write code on the whiteboard. The last thing is, if you don't coordinate before the interview and everyone comes in and asks the same questions over and over again, it's a waste of your time, right? Because you're not really covering a lot of topics. You're asking the same questions over and over again. Another thing I want to mention, and this I have done with some of our clients, especially when they are building a new team. They would ask us to come and help interview the first few hires, because like I mentioned, the first hire or first couple of hires are very, very important. They're going to help you do the interview process, right? So it's very important to not compromise in the interview process. And even if you don't have people who can interview for a big data position, you can get outside help. And you can shoot us an email. We'll be happy to do this for you. Another thing I want to mention is training and team development. We do training, right? That's our bread and butter. And what we see a lot of existing corporate clients are training their teams in new big data technologies. The reason we like this is because your team is already in place, right? I mean, you have been working with them for a while, so you know them, and they're also very eager to learn. And the opportunity for them to learn new technologies also makes them loyal to your company, right? So people tend to stick around longer if you give them a very good learning path. So here I've shown you guys 3 tracks and some courses we teach for each of these tracks, like developer, DevOps, and data science tracks. Another way we recommend is hiring out of college, right? Because you get really bright people and they are very hungry to learn. And if you have a good mentor or a good lead, you can really build a very nice team by hiring a lot of people out of college. And again, this is the point that we talked about amplification, right? So you need to have a solid team leader on top to basically mentor and guide these junior developers. We also offer what we call a college boot camp. What we do is we take people out of college and then kind of teach them all the modern technology stacks, because sometimes they may not have gone through this in college. So this way it reinforces all the modern technologies that companies using. And if you're interested in this one, again, contact us. We can customize this to fit your needs as well. So let's say you interviewed a bunch of people, you hired your team. Now, how do you keep the team? All right, we all know there's a lot of competition. There's a lot of people who are always willing to pay more money than what you can to hire people away from you. I always recommend, yes, money is, you can always compete on money, but that is not the only thing. A lot of people look for a career advancement opportunities, right? So for example, if you're a developer, they may want to become an architect, senior tech lead, things like that. So offer them the opportunities. A lot of people love mentoring other people, so give them a chance. Training, giving them a path to learn new technologies is very, very crucial to keep them loyal. Giving them open source time, meaning you can say 10% of their time can be spent on open source, right? So these are really, really great perks to attract really good developers and keep them in your team. Good developers enjoy networking and meeting other people and learning from other people. So send them to conferences, helping them present at conferences are a great way to keep them motivated. And always, the usual things like reducing commute hours, help them work from home, things like that always go a long way because, these are what I call soft perks. So I'm going to end this talk with a couple of tips from a couple of our clients. And we also work with them in building their big data teams. So this is Sunando Ghosh. We actually worked with them in hiring big data team, and we helped train his team in big data. So here are some of the tips from Sunando. Look for can-do attitude, as in, basically get it done attitude. Be very particular about who you hire, right? Because team chemistry is very, very important. Also, continuous learning path. Again, I mentioned this before as well. If people are continuously learning and they're learning new technologies, that's a great motivator for them to stay with you. And automate. We all end up doing grunt tasks, all the time. So automate as much as possible so people can focus on more productive use of their time. Another few tips from Kuldeep. So Kuldeep was at Samsung. We actually did a meetup together with them. Meetup was one of the initiatives to attract potential hires for Samsung, and we ran this for a year. And Kuldeep's tips are, organize meetups always, because you get a pretty good audience and also gets your name out there. Amplification is important. So, you hire top leaders and let them train and mentor young talent, right? So like I said, as people are learning more things, it's a huge incentive for them to stay with you. Incremental objectives, don't set out to build a huge thing. Set incremental goals and also achieve them. And so this way it kind of keeps momentum, right? You can keep building on things already built. I hope this has been useful. We gave you some practical tips from what we have seen in hiring and nurturing a big data team. And if you have any questions, please you can contact us at Elephant Scale here. And if you're also looking for training, please contact us also. And thank you so much.